If you've seen our videos on the Extar EP9, you know that we, like others who've tried it, found it to be an incredibly fun, lightweight, low recoiling, easy to operate, and affordable gun with a lot of potential versatility. Well, we're back at Extar, but this time to show you something else. 45 ACP. The Extar EP45 is out, and we're going to take a look at it. I've got some thoughts on 45 and why you actually might want to be interested in this. We'll of course take a look at fit and features and all of the regular stuff that we do in a tabletop coming up next here on GBGuns. I want to start things off with why 45, right? A lot of people are thinking, well, 45, that's that old caliber that's kind of been forgotten. Everybody does 9mm these days. I think that's because when people think of pistol calibers, they usually think of a compact or smaller handgun for self-defense and carry. And when it comes to that, there are a lot of factors that make 9mm preferred or more common. One, lighter weight, smaller guns, you hold higher capacity, and it costs less per round. So for training and all that, it just kind of makes sense. For a platform like the EP45, a large format pistol that is something that you could be used for home defense, as a truck gun, or fun on the range, the whole keeping the ammo lightweight and small thing doesn't really matter that much because you're going to be using either this Glock 13 rounder or one of the fun sticks out there for higher capacity anyways. So holding 30 rounds or holding 25 rounds or whatever it is your goal is doesn't really matter as much in a platform like this as it does for something on your hip. And here's another thing that excites me about this being out in 45 is it's a 6.5 inch barrel. Why does that matter? Well, I think a lot of folks who have fallen out of love with or forgotten or maybe not tried 45 is because, once again, going back to their pistol, right? A carry pistol typically is a 4-inch barrel or shorter is the trend these days. And I don't think people realize that while 9mm is standardized to perform from a 4-inch barrel, that's what here in the US the standards are, and that's what ammunition like this is formulated to perform ideally from. 45 has a bit of a different history. 45 ACP was developed by Browning. His task was to modernize 45 Colt, the old cowboy load. So he was taking a black powder load and using modern smokeless powder so that he could have a shorter case, and that's how 45 ACP was made. The goal of that was just about a 230 gram bullet moving about 850 feet per second, was easy to do, and intended for a 5-inch barrel. So when folks talk about or have experienced 45 maybe not having the energy they expect it to, that's probably because it's in a subcompact or small gun. I myself experienced the exact same thing before I understood ballistics. I had a 3.8 inch 45 double stack as a carry gun, and when I took it to a competition where we had to knock over steel targets, they put me in the big leagues because I had the big gun. But as it turns out, a 3.8 inch 45 has less energy than a 4-inch 9mm. 45 needs 5 inches or more to do its job. This is 6.5, so we're going to be getting better than what you typically see advertised on the ammunition boxes as far as energy. Beyond that, if we come in close and you take a look at the difference in hollow points, and yes, these are two different brands, but you can see where 45 hollow points have the nickname of being a quote-unquote flying ashtray of destruction heading towards this target. You've got a much bigger opening that allows for a fatter round to begin with, so that allows for a bigger overall expanded dimensions and ideally more terminal performance. So 45 in something like this that you keep tucked in the truck or bedside or something like that with the right barrel length has a lot of cool potential, and that has me pretty excited because 45 is not a bad round. It's just sort of misunderstood and doesn't fit today's trends. Now with that out of the way, let's take a look at the EP45. As we go through this, you'll have to excuse some of the camera angles. This whole setup is meant for smaller pistols, and so larger stuff like these large format pistols and rifles tend to not fit on the whole block. First, we're going to start off by showing clear, of course, and we'll do that with our left side charging handle. See, it's tucked in here, it's folding, and I believe under recoil will fold back out of the way. It's just a friction hold, but it sort of locks down once it's down. Pull that to the rear, and you notice that I was able to do that without much struggle. If you don't know my camera setup, I'm holding everything about 2 feet in front of me. So out here is a rather awkward spot for strength, and I was able to rack that back and lock it back because it does have less round bolt hold open using Glock pattern magazines. But Extar's recoil system is unique. Although this is a blowback gun, it's not your standard blowback recoil system. We experienced that and loved it on the EP9 because it shoots a lot softer than most of your blowback 9s. If you guys know what I'm talking about, there's a lot of blowback 9mm AR platform looking things out there, and you think it's going to be loads of fun, and it turns out to being oftentimes more recoil than 5.56 would have, which seems kind of silly. The Extars are not that way. They're different thanks to a patented and unique recoil system. Speaking of, while we're here, you notice we've got a foam covered buffer tube and an end cap to protect the buffer tube, but no brace. This is done because of the currently pending, I know those of you in the future may laugh or may cry at this moment in the video, the currently pending ATF legislation. Extar has developed this setup so that you don't have to worry about brace stuff. This just has a semi-firm rubber cup on the end to help protect the tube in case you got a mortared or bumping against stuff, just to protect it, and then the foam for comfort against your cheek or whatnot. So you see we had less round bolt hold open there. Let me drop that, and all the controls on this are AR-like. This looks very much like an AR pattern setup, minus the fact that we've got side charger and that these receivers are polymer. Just like the EP9, which comes in around 4 pounds, by the way, total, very lightweight platform. These polymer because there's really not that much stress applied to the receivers of the setup. All your strength needs to be inside the barrel and the bolt. So why make it metal if it doesn't need to be? As a result, these things are less expensive to make. Since Extar doesn't use distributors, you buy direct from them. That makes them, cuts out the middleman, no markups, so it makes them less expensive to buy as well, which is pretty cool. Alright, so up on the end, we've got an appropriate thread pattern for 45 ACP and a blast can on the end to help direct some of the percussion gases, etc., forward and downrange versus just out and about. That's on with a, you might be able to see the orange in there, like a polyurethane type washer bit to hold it in place, but it just snugs it. You don't have to crank it down, and you don't need a tool to break this loose, which is pretty cool. If you do have a 45 suppressor or muzzle device, it'll work on here. Our handguard has M-lock slots at the 3, 6, and 9 o'clock, and nice square edges, which I found fits really nicely in the hand. Maybe that's because I learned how to shoot on an M16A1 way back in the day, so that flat bottom on a handguard to me feels really comfortable. Up top we have a rail extension which mates up to the receiver, which of course has pick rail all the way across. We've got a Holosun on here. No, it doesn't come with that. That's just us getting ready to get this thing to the range. Small brass deflector, no forward assist as it's really not necessary, and I know I'm going to hurt some feelings here, but there's a lot of good solid evidence, and this is coming from a 15-year active duty vet, that forward assists really shouldn't be used 99% of the time. If your round's not chambering happy, stop and figure it out, especially as an armed citizen. Chances are you're not fighting off a human wave attack of foreign military. You don't need to risk damaging your gun to get that one shot off by jamming a cartridge in that doesn't want to be fed. So no forward assist is fine with me. Magazine release, as you saw, is down here, same position as an AR, but of course it's reaching forward since it's using pistol magazines and have the clasp on the front side. We have safety markers, and it's an AR-15 style safety selector. You may be able to use aftermarket selectors if you like. Don't know. Same thing with the trigger. Extar's own pistol grip. This is new, and it's an update from the EP9 that we reviewed. Got some nice angles here some traction on the side and not on the front and rear. Now on a handgun, you want traction front and rear as the gun's trying to rock. On a platform this large, when you're stabilizing it against the body and other places, that's not so important, but it actually becomes more comfortable to have a slick front end. And we have the little toe kick there, which I like because that helps more, for me, helps more to counter any recoil or muzzle rise than traction does. And that's because that's a mechanical leverage that tries to compress against the hand, keeping everything in place. On the end here, sorry, the camera's not quite going to catch it, we do have a QD point on this end cap, and the buffer tube is unique to Extar. It's a different dimension inside and out, I believe. Not entirely sure on that, so you can't necessarily just swap if you want to run their setup. Don't worry though, for you, those of you who like NFA items, they do have a kit so that you can convert to an SBR and put an actual stock on these things. I'll flip it over to the other side. You see our charging handle, and one thing that I noticed right away, especially with having this, once this Holson was on here, is the charging handle's got plenty of reach. It is a little bit wider, it seems to me, than the EP9's charging handle was, and that's nice because it lets you do this without any risk of racking your knuckle on either the optic or the pick rail. Now, because this is polymer, it's actually pretty smooth. Okay, there's no drumming sound. As I go back and forth, my finger isn't going thup, 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 thup through all of the rails. So that's another nice perk to the design on these things, is you're not going to be cutting open your knuckle when you go to charge the weapon. Magazine well, this is a Glock pattern setup, and one thing that is nice about seeing it, the receiver length that's on this thing, I'll show you in a second by grabbing a bigger mag. And for my YouTube moderators, before this gets demonetized, I'll have you note the camera focuses. Come on, camera. 24. That is the max capacity of this magazine. This is not a 30-round magazine. I am not violating YouTube advertiser guidelines. So as I stick this in, you'll notice that there's still plenty of space here between the firing hand and the support hand that's going to be bringing the magazine in. And I bring this up because there are other platforms, especially those that weren't designed with the Glock magazine pattern in mind, that once you get the Glock mag in, because of the angle that Glock magazines are designed for, it's part of why you have that wrist forward angle on Glock pistols, things can be cramped here. We've got plenty of space here, so that's a nice perk. This magazine, by the way, is one of the ones that we will be using for a multi-magazine test to run this gun with non-Glock manufactured but Glock pattern mags to see how well the gun runs. One of the many things we do in our range tests. There's our safety selector. You notice that we have a rear takedown pin, but we do not have a pivot pin exposed. More on that when we field strip it. You can see the texture on the grip, and that's the tail end of the gun. Next, we'll field strip this thing, take a look inside, and I'll show you some other interesting things about the EP45. Field stripping the EP45 is just like the EP9. It's a little bit different, but not too foreign to be too concerned. Show clear, and I'm going to push our takedown pin just like you would on an AR, this little guy right here. That may or may not require a little extra motivation because it is a snug fit from the receivers. And my fingernails are not strong enough to pry on there, so let me grab something out of the drawer to press it out. Random hex key did the job. With that out, we're going to come kind of forward and then out. See how that happened? And we do that because there's a hook here. And then additionally, the cap here rests over the top. So you got to kind of come forward it up and jimmy a little to get it out. And then this part, which the rear takedown pin grabs, needs to clear all of the trigger stuff. So there's a little bit of a finagling to do to get it out. But that separates the upper from the lower. If we take a look at our lower, we can see that we've got fairly standard, should be familiar to AR guys setup with a little bit of an extra feed ramp boost right there. Interesting location to have it there and molded into the, I mean this is steel, but this helps ensure we've got proper feeding from those funky Glock magazine patterns. If you want to look at the trigger, we'll do a little trigger talk here. Got some pre-travel, crisp break, spring-loaded authoritative reset. Not bad. Trigger weight feels to me about like a patrol rifle, somewhere around 6 poundish. I don't really bother too much with worry about that weight. And then inside here we've got the unique buffer system that Extar has designed. Let me see if I can get that out. After a quick manual reference, it's pretty easy because as you can see we don't have our standard buffer retainer set up in there. It's not quite like an AR. There's a plate in there. So the way this is done is you're going to put a little bit of pressure on the buffer, and then this plate is now free to move. Which if you're doing it upside down it can drop out. I'm trying to do it in a way the camera can see, which isn't always the easiest way to do it. So there's that plate. And now we can ease our buffer out. And part of the genius in how Extar designs these things is right here on the end of the buffer. You can see we've got a conical shape there. That mates up to a conical pad at the end of the tube that takes some of the bite out should this thing bottom out. And this does have some considerable heft to it, as you'd expect for 45 and for blowback. And if you're wondering, but Graham, just how heavy is it? There we are, 7.8 ounces is the weight of the buffer on this thing. And as I tuck that back in, if you are curious if this is your absolute, actually this way, why that matters, well, on a blowback firearm like this, it's the mass of the bolt and buffer and spring pressure that makes for a safe firing condition, as in provides enough, holds the system closed until enough pressure has dropped, as in bullet out the barrel, etc., before opening up and operating. So you need a heavy bolt and or a heavy buffer and or a heavy spring. Finding the right blend of that is something that Extar seems to be doing exceptionally well, because other ways the systems go with a lighter bolt or buffer to try to be more, I don't know, AR aftermarket parts friendly, and as a result you end up with a really heavy spring, which ends up being a bear to cycle. And as you saw, I can very easily cycle this thing freehand, holding this thing 2 feet in front of me, so it's not that bad. To get our bolt out, speaking of, we've got our charging handle all to the rear, and that lets us pull the thing out. Once it's out, you can get the bolt fin out. And you notice we have a conical shaped bolt here, which is pretty smart. Helps with some reliability, feeding things in. We've got a pin that can be pushed out to remove our firing pin, and the firing pin itself, if I can get a finger in there, can't quite, is spring loaded, which is a nice added safety boon. Reason being is you reduce your risk of a slam fire. And that lets us take a look inside for the chamber, and you can see we've got a massive, come on camera, there we go, cone in there. It's a conical chamber, or a conical feed ramp, if you will, all the way around. Sorry, I can't get a camera angle from the other side of it, but that helps make sure that everything is home and fitting correctly when this closes. And you can see there's a step there that the bolt rests up against the chamber, sealing everything inside while that explosion happens, which is pretty cool. Notice that this is fairly dry. That's because Extars are advised to run dry. Don't lube them. They're self-lubricating. You've got so much less friction between high quality coatings like this and polymer than you typically do in most of your guns. So although it seems weird, you run these things dry, and I've done it, it works. Putting our bolt back in, I'm going to drop that charging handle in, leave its home. Let's see, looks like there's a little detent that it rests on. Nope, that's not all the way in. I need to figure that part out. Interesting. I'll have to figure out what I did there. Figured it out. It's pretty simple. and something I think I should show you guys so that you understand. And you'll see it very clearly here. See this step and a ledge? And you see on the end of this, there's that little step right there where my fingernail is. You need to make sure that this seats all the way down, which requires getting the bolt into just the right spot. And when it's all the way down, then it'll pass over that internal ledge, and now the thing won't come out. So good thing to know so you don't freak out like I almost did. Now reassembly beyond this is pretty easy, mating up that leading edge hook and then seating everything down, a little bit of shimming, whatnot. As I do that, I'll describe what we'll be doing in the shooting impressions video. First off, just absolute cold shots, truly the first shots that we make out of a firearm we do on camera. So any wild first impressions, figure this out. I know it's probably painful to watch, but there we go. Okay, so we're seating, make sure the back is seated, you still have a gap here, and then bring everything down and back. And while that's down and back, we're gonna push that pin back through. There we go. Film it all real. You saw my first time doing it, so that's what happens. But anyways, our absolute first shots through the gun. We'll do our multi-mag test. Only have a couple variants of Glock pattern 45 ACP mags, but we're gonna give those a try to see how the aftermarket mags run through the gun. Then I think the most important part is the infamous what's for dinner test. Seeing what a gun eats. 10 different loads through this thing. The manual does not specify any restrictions to ammunition, so we'll try various different things. Since part of why 45 large format pistols and PCCs have not been super popular is because getting 45 hollow points to feed can be difficult. It looks like Extar has this fixed. We'll find that out in the range test. Maybe not everything runs. We'll figure out which ones do and don't and show you it all happening. And then even more importantly is with this 6.5 inch barrel, what kind of energy are we getting out of there? Because I highly suspect that we're going to have some impressive numbers coming out of this thing. And with this buffer system and the way that Extar did the EP9, I really expect this thing to shoot just maybe not as soft as 9mm, but to also be surprisingly soft shooting for what it is. And we've got some interesting stuff that we'll throw into it. For example, this 78 grain, 1900 foot per second civil defense stuff. That's the shiny bullets I was showing you earlier. This produces massive energy. Normally they're saying 600 foot-pounds of energy. I'm betting that test barrel was not 6.5 inches long. So we'll do all the math on that and figure out what kind of energy we're getting out of these things. Should be pretty fun. Some of you I know I don't need to justify 45 to. Others I think you did, and that's why I had that big explanation about why I think this is particularly exciting. 45 is also known for less penetration, so as in less chance of over penetration, making it all the more appropriate as a house gun, especially if you've got friends, family, loved ones in the house. I know not all of those are the same category. Or if you live with neighbors, etc., you don't want to be zipping through walls, hitting people 3 doors down. So this could be a pretty cool platform. I'm excited to have our hands on a really early one. Be one of the first ones to bring this story out to you. We'll get to the range with this as soon as we can. And thanks for watching.